Welcome, beautiful people. Thank you for joining us today on another rousing episode of The Brief. And I'm your host. Right, we're already in the mood. We're ready for it. I'm your host, Carrie Eleveld, and Marcos is out today. So joining me today is one of my very favorite co-hosts. Yes, our own sort of an inside joke there. But I mean, it's true, but sort of an inside joke. But anyway, our own Daily Kos communications director, Carolyn Fiddler. Sorry, I screwed up your last name, of course. Carolyn Fiddler.
I've been called worse, Carrie, I swear. Totally okay.
Me too. And I've answered to worse, frankly. But yeah. So anyway, Carolyn is a keen observer of state legislative politics. She's also a Virginia aficionado. And she's just come off a conducting candidate training in Pennsylvania. So we're going to ask about her about that key state. In a few minutes, we're going to bring on a good buddy of mine, Joe Sudbay, a political consultant who works on with progressive groups on issues like immigration, LGBTQ rights, and more. And we're going to talk about some of the missed messaging opportunities that Democrats can and should be taking advantage of leading up to the midterm. Because believe it or not, Carolyn, and this is a little known fact among pundits in Washington and Washington insiders. Yep. You ready for it?
I'm ready. I'm so ready.
Not a single vote has been cast in the midterm general election.
But haven't we already lost?
Yeah, I know. Listen, hey, you guys out there, pick yourselves up off the floor. It turns out that we haven't lost the general election yet, even though everybody says we have. Yeah. Okay. So that's our big revelation. I've been doing some breaking news right here on The Brief. So anyway, we're gonna delay that conversation for a second. We will come back to it not because we don't want to we're not trying to just pound on Democrats. I mean, but we do want to highlight some of these opportunities so people can walk away and use some of this stuff in their everyday lives, because the heroes of 2018 and 2020 were voters, right? We're a coalition of white, Black, Latino, and Asian American voters who came together to save the country from a slide toward fascism under Republican rule. And so we can do it again. And we want you to have, the knowledge of what we're seeing so that you can use it too in your everyday lives. Okay, so all right, I'll get off my pedestal and get back to
you look awfully good up there.
All right. Well, if I was looking good, hey, Anyway, but first, Carolyn is fresh off of conducting candidate trainings in Pennsylvania, which everybody knows is coming up, is going to be a key midterm swing state in November. And there's a major governor's race there. There's a hugely consequential U.S. Senate race for an open seat. There's lots of other state legislative races. And Carolyn was there. And Carolyn, can you just give us sort of an overview of what you did? And if you can give us a sense of what you feel like the environment was there, issues that seem to be percolating, et cetera.
I would absolutely love to. It was a wonderful way to spend my Saturday. It was a gorgeous day. A little bit of a drive up to Harrisburg, but I'm in the DC area, for those of you who don't know me, probably most of you. And I walked into this room full of people that had all been rapid tested. It was a nice, reassuring scene. But a room full of, about 40-ish candidates who are running to flip seats or pick up open seats in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, because this is the first cycle in at least 20 years where the maps for the state legislature are remotely competitive.
Good news.
These candidates have a lot on their plates.
Right.
Yeah.
So how many seats would have to? I mean, it might not flip, right? But how many seats would it take to sort of flip the state legislature in a better situation for Democrats?
Well, there are 203 seats in the state house. First of all, is a good sort of
I thought you were
context.
going to say 203 seats. I was like, "Ooh, that's a tall order."
Yeah.
Okay.
No, sorry. That's the entire legislature. And so these maps are new, fairly recently settled. So filing recently closed. So now we have candidates in all these districts. Democrats do have to pick up a decent number of seats, and it might be a multi-cycle prospect. But we said that about Virginia in 2017 too, and it still was technically a multi-cycle prospect, but it definitely changed the landscape dramatically to have Democrats within like one seat of the majority, and working towards that in Pennsylvania will also be absolutely a worthwhile endeavor, even if they don't win the majority this time around, which there is a path. It is narrow, but it does exist. So I walk in this room full of all these great candidates, different ages, all sorts of different demographic groups represented, people of color, white people, very young people, folks I wasn't sure. Sometimes I wasn't sure if they were like a staffer or they were actually a candidate running for office. Like, the energy in the room was just really, really great. Everyone was excited to be there, even though it was a beautiful Saturday, and learn about how to put together a skilled campaign, the kind of campaign that you need to run if you're going to flip a house or win an open seat in any legislature. The guy who runs the Pennsylvania House did come from Virginia. He has experience flipping legislatures. So he's up there, and I'm up there to help them learn how to not have social media and their campaign.
I'm sorry, that's such a sad statement about where we are in elections. But anyway, yes.
No, I was there to help them understand how it can also like work in the campaign and help them, present themselves to voters as authentic, as real people that their voters can trust and cast their ballots for. So it wasn't just that, but there were several slides that was just like, the internet's forever. When in doubt, don't post, don't tweet, etc.
Don't do this. Don't do this. So anyway, things that would, conceivably things that you're telling Democrats not to do are things that would win Republicans a lot of votes. But anyway, so
we did talk a lot about bad faith attacks and how, anything is going to get taken out of context if it can be. So just something to be mindful of, but also you can't sit around and say nothing just because Republicans are in a, run for the lowest bottom denominator in any situation.
So what are the, did you get a sense, like, even if sometimes you get a sense, like when I would go to places as a reporter on the ground, like just seeing headlines, in newspapers when they existed, but like just, being around, you could get a sense sometimes of like what some of the issues were that seemed hot there. Did you get a sense of some of those?
Oh yeah, for sure. Environmental issues, fracking is a really contentious issue in Pennsylvania because fracking means jobs. Unions are stronger in Pennsylvania than they are in my home state, Virginia. And there's a lot of conflict around fracking good, fracking bad, fracking acceptable in certain circumstances. Or am I going, ham on like green things? Fracking is the enemy. Like there are a lot of complicated issues in Pennsylvania.
And just to clarify, not that I'm like some sort of energy guru, but fracking is the process by which you can extract natural gas, right, from the Earth's surface. But it involves a lot of dicey sort of,
involves waste products
technology,
that can be very problematic and processes that can undermine local geological structures for sure. If it's done poorly. So yeah, really complicated. Education is an issue. Republicans have been in charge in Pennsylvania, governorship notwithstanding, for a very long time, and so there's a lot of bad things that Democrats have to invest in time in rolling back when they do win the majority there. So social issues, education's a big one. Obviously, roads, traffic. I mean, Pennsylvania is big, a lot of roads in it. People got to get places. That requires money to fix those roads so people can get to the places without ruining their cars, stuff like that. Oh, Carrie, I think you're muted.
Hold on.
Hey.
Okay, sorry. Does it help that that Democrats and President Biden, ushered through a bill to address infrastructure needs? Is that like a help to candidates or?
It is, especially if Biden's approval numbers improve by the fall. The credit taking is a big deal, and Democrats are notoriously bad at it. So I'm just going to say it.
Right.
So there are things for which Democrats can claim credit in in Pennsylvania through this bill. Mm-hmm. But in terms of like how much it's like, hey, Biden did this great thing for us, that sort of like inserting state legislative campaigns into the national narrative on purpose may or may not happen. The landscape's still taking shape. Republicans are going to attach Democrats to Biden anyway. It's what Republicans do. They nationalize everything because they don't have anything local to run on. So
nationally, they don't have much to run on either. I don't know if you noticed that, but like the House, I still think hasn't, the House GOP still hasn't released what I think they're calling their commitment to America, kind of a play on contract with America. Because
I'm just can we just let the contract thing be this one-time thing a long time ago, and can we just like move on? Like
not Kevin.
You have an original idea for at least naming conventions.
No, not Kevin McCarthy. He hasn't had a fresh idea in years. I'm telling you, not a fresh idea. It's like maybe since birth. That might have been his freshest idea. Was right there. The first time he yelled coming out of the womb may have been his freshest idea. Sorry. Okay.
It was his only original thought ever. Wow.
So, all right. Well, there you go. He did have a fresh idea once. So that's the glass half full view of that take on Kevin McCarthy. But and Senate Republicans had planned, under Mitch McConnell, not to release anything until the Senate campaign chief Rick Scott went rogue and came out with, hey, we're going to raise taxes for 50% of Americans, most of them working Americans who can't afford to pay taxes. So like, middle class working Americans, we're just going to raise your taxes. That's what Rick Scott said. Mitch McConnell was not super happy about that. In any case,
no. We got some Republicans in disarray things happening, and I feel like that might deserve a little more coverage than it's getting, but
it just might. Democrat. Okay, this is maybe a good segue if you feel comfortable with it for bringing on Joe Sudbay, because that is something that we could capitalize, that Democrats could capitalize on. Republicans in disarray. There's Joe. And let me just introduce him again. Joe is a political consultant who works with progressive groups on issues like immigration, LGBTQ rights, and more. He's also a frequent host on Sirius XM Progress, where he started a segment called State of the States, where I think our own Carolyn Fiddler has weighed in a few times, if I remember correctly. A few times, right? And Joe also happens to be my good buddy and constant partner in crime. We're always spitballing ideas over GChat. And so, tweeting each other's stuff out, things like that. He's like comfort food to me. So I was like, who can we bring on to talk about strategy? Because he is also a very keen observer of strategy, where Democrats could make gains, messaging, things like that. So, Joe, welcome to the show. I tell you what, start off, let's run over just a few headlines I jotted down while I was making the show notes up in the past week that seemed like, I don't know, they could be of interest to voters, something you might want to touch on here or there if you were a Democrat running for office. So a federal judge concludes in a ruling that Trump more likely than not, I think is what he said, committed a felony related to the January 6th insurrection. Okay. Trump publicly solicits dirt on President Biden from a U.S. adversary, global pariah, and likely war criminal, Vladimir Putin, and Russian President Vladimir Putin. Trump's White House phone logs just happened to include a 7-hour gap on January 6th. Where did that go? How did that happen? Yeah. And conservative activist, who also seems to be a tad off, Ginny Thomas, wife of sitting Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, was actively pushing Trump's White House to overturn the 2020 election results just after the election. So, I mean, Joe, you're constantly gauging these things. I know that there are some buckets we've talked about of things, of issues that we would like to see Democrats hit a little bit more. What's your take on where we are with Democratic messaging?
Well, I feel like Republicans keep handing Democrats issues on silver platters. And Democrats aren't the best at capitalizing on them. And it's really frustrating. We also have a media, and it goes to something Carolyn was saying earlier. Republicans are in extreme disarray. I mean, they're fighting amongst themselves all the time. Mitch McConnell's fighting with Rick Scott. Some of them hate Trump, but they're afraid to. Trump dumps candidates he doesn't support. A bunch of Republicans in Georgia are going to try and defeat Herschel Walker because he's kind of a damaged candidate. But so they're all fighting amongst themselves. But it's like there's almost like a rule in the media. If Democrats are holding a press conference and someone sneezes, the Capitol Hill Press Corps immediately scribes Democrats in disarray.
It does feel like that's always like the narrative, as opposed to Republicans clearly infighting, just consistently over the last, I don't know, year. Yeah. Why do you think that is? Is it the alliteration that just makes it so enticing, or what?
I just think it's the way things are, Carolyn. You know how the DC media works, the conventional wisdom, the mindset. They're a bunch of lemmings, and they don't think outside the box. And it's frustrating. It's something Carrie observed firsthand when she was at, working in the White House. And, a good example was last week when President Biden held a press conference, and he got like almost every single question was about his remark about Putin. You get that level of access, come up with an original question. There's a lot of news going
There's
on.
other stuff going on, y'all.
Right. Not all ask the same questions. That's a reality that we have to deal with. And a reality we have to deal with is another series of headlines on Friday was the massive increase in jobs that have occurred under the Biden administration. It gets very little attention. But you see, Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, in fact, I just wrote about this today. So let me just run over Biden's job numbers, because apparently, according to a Navigator research poll, which is a progressive polling consortium of firms, right? 37% of Americans actually don't know that we gained jobs over the last year, that we netted jobs, right? 47% of Republicans believe that we lost jobs over the last year. And if I remember correctly, 43% of independents also think that we lost jobs over the last year, which is just crazy because it's so far from the truth. So, I mean, not only did we add some 430,000 jobs in March, it was the 11th consecutive month of job growth above 400,000. March's jobs gains marked the longest stretch of growth in records dating back to 1939. So nearly a century of like historic job growth, right? The economy has recovered more than 90% of the $22 million jobs lost in the spring of 2020. It totally has surpassed initial expectations by economists and forecasters. Workers have also gained 5%. They've made wage gains of 5.6% over the past year. Those are wage gains, right? Which is really strong. The unemployment rate sits at 3.6%. That's down from 6.4% when Biden took office. Amazing. And President Biden's created an average of about 568,000 jobs per month during his first year in office. So, I mean, the bottom line is there. I know that's a lot of numbers.
Is that a lot? It seems like a lot of jobs.
It seems like a lot of good news.
A lot of jobs. Biden's killing it. He's like literally out of the water, like totally surpassing expectations. So anyway, I wanted to take an opportunity to at least run over those while we're talking about it.
No, those are worthwhile stats that I feel like we should all already know because everyone should be talking about them.
Right. Exactly. And the White House should be talking about it more. Democrats on Capitol Hill should be talking about it more because it's real. And it was interesting when some of these numbers came out, I saw several political reporters tweeting saying, wow, this is odd. People don't know about this. Well, maybe because you're not telling them. Some of our media observers like Eric Boehlert and Dan Frumkin have done a really good job of showing what the media is talking about when they don't tell these stories. So yeah, it's incumbent upon Democrats to lean in on good news and to take credit for the good things they do. And they are doing good things. Is it everything we want? No. But is it markedly better than if Donald Trump had won? Oh, absolutely. That vaccine rollout was amazing. You know, we more or less have COVID under control. Sure, not exactly where we'd want to be. We'd have it more under control if we didn't have one news network that was telling its viewers not to worry about it. But that's an important move forward. We have, Democrats trying really hard to pass good legislation. Last week alone, on Thursday, Democrats in the House passed a bill to cap insulin prices. That is a real issue for American people. Yeah. Now it's going to the Senate, and I did see that Susan Collins was one of the negotiators in the Senate, which dooms it from the start, but that's another story.
Joe Sudbay is a Mainer, in case people don't know. So he's spent a lot of time thinking about Susan Collins and how much he appreciates her presence in the Senate. Yes. But didn't more than half of Republicans vote against that capping of insulin? I mean,
193. 193. I think if that's
like
the right
the entire
number.
caucus.
Yeah. And then on Friday, Democrats voted to legalize marijuana. Now, that's a piece of legislation that has passed on the ballot in states like Arizona, Alaska, South Dakota. South Dakota, it was overruled by the courts. But there are really great progressive policies that pass at the state level by referenda that Democrats on the Hill, I was really happy to see them move on marijuana legalization. It's like, it's way past time. Yeah. The Senate probably won't pass it. We know the Senate's a problem. And we know that particularly there are two senators who are big problems. But even with them, we've been able to do this week is historic. Ketanji Brown Jackson will be confirmed by the United States Supreme Court.
Oh my gosh.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And the Supreme Court's a big issue that we should be talking about. Yesterday, Lindsey Graham said, if we were in charge, Ketanji Brown Jackson would never have gotten a hearing. Today, Mitch McConnell was asked by one of those star Capitol Hill reporters, if you take back the Senate, will you give a hearing? And Mitch McConnell said, well, we're not going to make any predictions. You don't have to make any predictions. We already saw what you did in 2016.
Yeah.
And this is a Supreme Court that over the next few weeks and months is going to take our rights away. They're going to take rights away.
Yep.
They're going to end abortion rights. They're going to make it much easier to carry guns around, which, we keep hearing Republicans complaining about crime. How much of it is gun crime because of your fealty to the NRA? A lot.
Right.
There are issues Democrats need to lean into.
We're good guys with the guns. So stop the bad guys with the guns.
Oh yeah.
That's fine, right?
I've heard that for years. I used to work with Jim Brady, right? Jim Brady, who was Ronald Reagan's press secretary, right? He was shot at the Hilton right off Connecticut Avenue when the president was shot. Jim was shot in the head. I spent 7.5 years working with Jim. It's one of the greatest honors of my life. I love the guy. And he used to say to people would say that to him, you need guns to protect yourself. He said,
how do you say that to a shooting victim? What the hell? Sorry.
Say it to a shooting victim who was with the president under the protection of the United States Secret Service, arguably the best trained law enforcement people in the country, right?
Qualify as good guys with guns. Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways,
what did he used to say? So he used to say what?
He used to say, when I was shot, I was surrounded by the United States Secret Service. They are literally the best trained law enforcement professionals in the world, whose job is to make sure no one can get a shot off at the president. And it still happens. So you're telling me that someone without training is going to be a great marksman and protect themselves and their family in a dangerous situation? I don't buy it. And you know what? I tend to agree with Jim Brady.
Yeah, no, the goodest guys with guns couldn't stop it.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to argue with that. Pretty hard to argue. So, you know, so Carolyn, you spent a lot of time obviously thinking about Virginia politics, and we, you know, after we did some before Virginia votes pieces, you know, we went over that material here, and then we did some takeaways. And I just wonder, now that we've had a few months, you know, intervening, and we're starting to get a little bit of a taste of what the midterms are going to be like and some of the top issues. Do you think some of the takeaways about those elections still hold? I mean, one of them was, oh, well, you know, Youngkin was able, Glenn Youngkin, the Republican candidate, was able to sort of keep Trump at arm's length. And that is, you know, the gold standard for making yourself palatable to suburban districts, and keeping some of, you know, winning over some of the suburbs, winning them back after a lot of them fled Trump, while also, you know, being able to claim Trump's, you know, most fervent base, right? That was one. And then another one was, it's all about this, you know, the election was all about critical race theory and blah, blah, blah. So and, you know, whipping up, you know, people, suburban voters supposedly were really upset about critical race theory being taught in the schools, which frankly, I never bought. But I just would like to hear what you, if you were to say, well, I think something still holds, or none of it holds, I'd love to hear your takes.
Well, and it doesn't just have to be my, you know, back of napkin expertise here. There's been actual research into like what happened in Virginia. Was it this anti-quote CRT like scare nonsense? It was mostly just Republicans turning out more. Like it wasn't like, and it wasn't even like tepid Democrats being like, well, I don't like Republicans, but this critical race theory thing scares me. It wasn't that. It was not that. And Republicans
there was like a silver wave, wasn't there? One of the biggest, yes. I think I read something where one of the biggest groups, I don't have the percentages, but biggest increase in voters who hadn't voted in some previous elections were much older.
It was the olds.
It was the olds.
Which is a word I use to describe myself. But in this context, it's specifically people much older than I am who hadn't voted in a while. And for some reason, well, not for some reason, change is scary. And if you're used to the world being a certain way, you're going to be scared. And Republicans are great at scaring people and convincing people who are scared that the only one who could save them from the big bad X, whatever thing of the day they decide everyone needs to be scared of. Now it's transgender kids, apparently. The Republicans are great at motivating their voters to A, be scared by the thing that is not actually scary, and to B, turn out and vote as a way to protect themselves against the scary thing. So, all that being said, Republicans are definitely going to use that at every level of the ballot this time around. They're going to paint their Democratic opponents as pedophiles trying to allow the gays to groom kids. I mean, it's a slur I thought we left behind in the 90s. Like, I'm old enough to remember when that went out of fashion the first time.
Right. Well, I thought it was Madison Cawthorn who tried to clean up that situation and let us know that the real sex fiends and cocaine bumpers are Republicans on the Hill. Apparently,
I don't need Republicans and sex fiends being connected in any way in my brain ever. Thank you, Jesus.
I know. You know, I just want to bring up for context. that what a totally fringe and irrelevant issue this transgender attack is by Republicans, right?
Well, it's been a long time coming. It's been well orchestrated. They planned this years ago. They started they being the extreme right wingers. They started building this infrastructure years ago. Wow.
Just after I do this, I want to ask Joe a follow-up question. I'm going to ask it before I talk because otherwise I'll forget it. That's how the mind is these days. So anyway, it's just like clockwork. Anyway, but the question is, have Republicans ever really won on this issue? Okay, so just keep that in mind. All right. So let me tell you how irrelevant on the transgender issue, right? Let me tell you how irrelevant and like fringe this issue is that the governor of Utah, who's a Republican, recently vetoed the bill. Now, he was overridden by the GOP dominant state legislature, right? But he recently vetoed a bill that was attacking, transgender women playing sports, right, in high school. And he said in his letter, he said there were like some 200,000 high school athletes in the state. 4 of them were transgender and 1 of them was playing girls sports. So this is, and that's part, and then he of course went over this horrific stats about how much more likely transgender youth are to consider how much more likely transgender just showed up. That cat just showed up.
You did. Popped up in my lap. Live TV everywhere.
Right, live TV. This is what live YouTube is about. But anyway, so how much more, how much higher the suicidality is among transgender youth. And he said, quote, "I want them to live." Like, the fact that we're trying to pass a bill that's going to affect 1 person, and yet it's going to up the, possibility that a bunch of trans youth are going to take away, hey, I have no future and I might as well go ahead and take my own life. He just, he couldn't, of course, the GOP legislature just rushed to pass it anyways. But so it's a totally fringe issue. It affects very few people, I think I've heard that there's a lot of girls still playing sports across the United States, despite this big, scary issue of, transgender involvement. So anyway, but the conventional wisdom is that this has legs, and and that supposedly Republicans can win, elections on this. And I just wonder, Joe, what you think about that. Have you ever seen anything like that?
Well, first of all, the way conventional wisdom gets formed in DC, in the DC media echo chamber, Republicans say something's an issue, and then the media says, okay, well, that's an issue. And it's a winning issue because Republicans say it's a winning issue. I think it goes to kind of what you were saying earlier in the show. Republicans don't have an agenda. They don't have things they can run on. Look in Texas. The governor of Texas literally let his people freeze to death last winter. So what's his big issue this year? Sending his child protective services to the homes of families. Meanwhile, we find out that the actual facilities under his control, there was rampant sexual abuse, but couldn't be bothered dealing with real problems because you have to create problems. At my work, I work with a group called America's Voice. And actually in 2017, 2018, we started monitoring Republican ads.
And this is, just to be clear, that's an immigration group.
It's an immigration group. And we monitored them for anti-immigrant messaging. And it is amazing, the filth that comes out of Republican ads. It's disgusting. And it's only gotten worse. We have a young man named Zachary Mueller who does it right now, who every day is coming up. And the attacks are always on immigrants and lies about immigrants. They've heavily weighed in on this replacement theory. The replacement theory is basically what those white nationalists in Charlottesville were chanting, "You will not replace us." So that's who Republicans are echoing. They're doing this invasion rhetoric that Trump always used. In El Paso in 2019, a young man with an assault weapon killed 23 people because he was trying to stop the Hispanic invasion that he'd been hearing about. That's their messaging on immigration. They are brutal on transgender kids. I mean, can you think of a more vulnerable group of people than transgender kids? And if you've ever watched, and I'd encourage anyone, watch some of the testimony that some of these kids have given in state legislatures. It is heart-wrenching. And also watch their parents and watch the experience their parents went through, realizing they had a kid who they thought was going to kill themselves until they started the therapies and their child blossomed. That's what you want. That's what you want parents to be doing. Republicans have decided that's an issue. Look in Florida. I mean, I think what's important, and Carolyn will know what I mean because she and I have discussed state legislatures in great detail many times. State legislatures, Republicans use them for three things, I always say. They use them as ways to prevent people from participating in the electoral process through gerrymandering, voter ID, strict voter ID laws, basically voter suppression. They use them as pipelines for their version of talent. And like some of the worst people in Congress came up through state legislatures.
Like Matt Gaetz.
Yeah, absolutely. And back in the day, it was Rick Santorum. Rick Santorum and Marilyn Musgrave. I remember going back in time, but like a lot of them. And the other thing they do is they use them as incubators for their batshit crazy ideas.
Yep.
That's what we're seeing in Florida. They work with groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom. And what's really scary right now, and it ties into the national story, is these state legislators see the United States Supreme Court giving them a green light to do the craziest stuff they want. And that, look at the horrible anti-abortion laws they've passed, these anti-trans laws, attacks on the queer community at large, the voter suppression. They all think they can get away with it. It's all tied together. And I think progressives have finally started to clue in more than they used to on state legislatures. I think it's so important. And going back to Virginia too, I mean, as tough as it was to lose the governor's race, we lost the House of Delegates. It's a 52-48 margin. But if you want to know the importance of state legislatures and what it means to have a Democratic body, look at Virginia and look at what Louise Lucas, State Senator Louise Lucas, and the Democratic caucus in the Senate stopped from happening in Virginia. Virginia would be Florida or Texas right now, absent the Democratic-controlled state Senate. So those races are so important. And I think progressives and the national Democrats, I think, ignored them for too long at their peril, and we're paying a price right now.
I hear you say ignore in the past tense. I'm not sure I agree with that.
Well, I think, I think, Carolyn, it's gotten somewhat better. I mean, I heard Jessica Post from the DLCC, Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee, on the down ballot a week or two ago, and they're finally getting more funding.
They are, but they're still not at parity with Republicans.
Not at parity, no. But then there are also groups that have sprung up. I know Dan Squadron's got a group right now that had just got some money. So there are other outside super PACs. Finally, look, is it where it needs to be? No, but is it light years ahead of where it was in the 80s and 90s and even 2010? And I swear, okay, when I say this, it makes me sound like facetious, but I swear to God, I've focused on state legislatures the whole time been in DC. It's why I started the show on SiriusXM Progress to lift up the work of state legislative candidates. I swear sometimes when you're talking about state legislatures with people in DC, they're like, they have legislatures in the states? What do they do? Isn't that cute? Yeah. Well,
I have a real story to tell you, and a real sad one. So once upon a time, I actually used to work at DLCC. I worked there in 2010. And
what's DLCC again? That's Democratic Legislative
Campaign Committee.
Yeah.
Which no reporters seem to know what that acronym stood for.
Right.
Like not a one.
Right, including me. I couldn't remember.
Brain break. Well, when reporters call me asking for information about something but don't know the name of the organization I'm working for, it's absolutely wild. It's a level of cognitive dissonance I wasn't quite ready to deal with. By the time I left DLCC, everyone knew what it stood for, but it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
And that was not that long ago. But yeah, no, the DLCC I don't think didn't exist until I want to say the 90s, and its counterpart committee didn't exist until even later.
Right.
Republican State Leadership Committee, which is an umbrella group for RLCC, secretaries of state, lieutenant governors, secretaries of agriculture, and now they also have a group underneath that umbrella that elects Republican and conservative judges on the state level, which is a whole other conversation, maybe a whole other show in the future. I can go on about that for way too long.
Yeah.
Wait, so what was the story? Did I miss it, or was just that people used to call you? What was the story, the sad story you were going to tell us about DLCC? Do you
Well,
remember?
there was a reporter I don't want to blow up because
Okay.
he's a good guy, but a reporter from a prominent publication called me once because I was way back in the day, early 2011. Wisconsin Democrats had walked out of the Senate to block Act 10, and DLCC was running some ads up there in support of their Senate Democrats because we at the time already knew we were going to start doing some recalls in those Senate races. And I give the exclusive to another reporter. So this reporter calls me up, starts screaming at me, is so mad I gave the exclusive on that ad to another reporter because he'd been all over this from the beginning. And I was like, hey, I know you've been doing great coverage, but you hadn't reached out to me before. Next time that exclusive can go to you. He's like, great. So what does DLCC stand for again? After he screamed at me. It was amazing.
No. It's a rough go. Those reporters, they work hard. They just don't always know who they're dialing. There's only so many facts you can check up on before you start, pounding the phone. So. And
that was the first time anyone had cared about state legislatures, maybe in a while, maybe ever. I don't know.
Right. So let's talk. I'm just going to see if this goes anywhere. I've been thinking a little bit about messaging. So messaging that Democrats should be using. One of the recent, and looking at, I've been listening to some podcasts about it. And also, writing about some of these messaging memos that are coming out from people who are doing some pretty interesting research. One of the takeaways that I had, because I often think about when I get a chance to talk to average people about, like voting, like people in my kids' school or whatever, about, it inevitably comes up because I say I work for a lefty. They say, what do you do? And I say I work for a lefty political blog. And, and then politics comes up, and then you're talking to them, and, very few of them are as lefty as I am. But anyway, so, how can you not turn them off, right? How can you just draw them out? You can ask them, what kind of questions, things like that. So I had this revelation. Again, I don't know where this is going in our conversation, but I'm just going to throw it out there. Where I was listening to this podcast about messaging, and this one group had done a lot of work on identifying what kind of messages sort of worked with, different kinds of voters. And one of the things they said was, whatever you do when you start talking about, and you're trying to, draw people in and get them motivated to like get involved in the democratic process and whatever, don't tell them what keeps you up at night. So when they say, yeah, politics really isn't for me, I'm not that involved, don't be like, you do realize that our democracy is collapsing, don't you?
You're saying I shouldn't lead with that. Okay.
Which frankly, I've come damn close to doing sometimes. Like, oh, what worries me is that we're become a fascist, Republican controlled society. So apparently I shouldn't have been doing that. So I'm going to reorient a little bit. But, I just thought it was, thinking about how you can talk to people about these issues was kind of interesting. And one of the things that also came up, which I've seen in other messaging memos, is that for a lot of people that just shuts them down, right? Mm-hmm. That hearing things are so bad that they're about to collapse, or hearing your worst fear just kind of shuts them down. It's too overwhelming. So instead of making them feel like they want to, all the people who are overwhelmed by what's happening and think, oh my God, this is like a terrible situation, they are watching this podcast. They are reading, or listening to this, right? Here we are. They are watching our YouTube presentation. They're reading, listening listening to the podcast, they're reading the newspapers, they're, probably giving money, they're, trying to talk to their friends, whatever. They're
already
doing
engaged.
it. Yeah, they're already engaged. They're organizing and whatever. But how do you talk to someone who isn't that involved? And apparently that's not the thing you say. But the thing that does sort of work for a lot of voters is to make them feel empowered, make them feel like they can be like part of something that's bigger than themselves. And they have the power to vote. They have the power to get involved. They have the power to enact, the change that they want to see through casting their vote, knocking on doors to help other people cast their vote, writing them, calling them, whatever they want to do, giving money, whatever it is, whatever their gig is. So anyway, I throw that out there and wonder if you guys can add to what people might be able to do to sort of engage other folks who aren't as like consumed with this as we are.
You're talking about actual normal human beings who lead their
Chatty
normal
with
lives and don't, aren't. I mean, when you pay attention to the news like we do, you can't help but be aware that democracy is collapsing and everything is really terrible. But a normal human doesn't know that because they don't have the time to consume all that, and that is a challenging way to live one's life. So that is I think a really important point to maybe not lead every conversation with that, even though it is tempting. I find it tempting to lead conversations with that personally. So I'm really glad that we're talking about this.
Right.
Yeah. It's hard not to. I mean, because it's real, right? It's a real problem. We actually had an attempt to overturn our election on January 6th. And I think everybody, even if you don't pay attention, that happened. And in the next few weeks, we're going to see, hopefully, televised hearings in prime time discussing this and explaining to the American people from the January 6th Commission what happened. So that's out there. I think a way to do it, and there's a group called Way to Win that I think does really important research. And one of the things Jennifer Ancona, she's talked about it. I had her on SiriusXM when I was hosting once. Well, I've had her a couple of times because it's one of the perks of doing that show. It's kind of like the same thing here. You get to talk to people really interesting, right? And I'm like, I'm such a dork. I love it. And she's terrific. And every story needs a hero and a villain is one of the things they've been finding recently. And the heroes in this story are the American people. I mean, the heroes are the people who voted for Joe Biden. We keep hearing about the 74 million who voted for Trump. 81 million, the biggest turnout ever for a presidential election, elected Joe Biden. Thank you to every single one of those people. And you have to show up again because you know what? The work you did then saved us from so much.
But only for a hot second. That's the thing.
Well, it did. I mean, but well,
it's a marathon, not a sprint, right?
It's a marathon. And I've done 9. I've done 9 marathons. So I understand a marathon. You have to start slow and keep going. And it's painful. And there are times it's going to hurt. But you know that it's important to keep going. And so I think, it's important to talk about the fact that, we have had some great accomplishments in the Biden administration. We talked about some of them earlier. We know, look, there are crises facing this world right now. There's this horrific war in the Ukraine. Can you imagine Donald Trump in charge right now? It would be horrible. He still loves Vladimir Putin. Look, and you can't pretend the climate is not in danger. And that's a really important issue for young people. And we can't pretend that our rights aren't going to be taken away by the Supreme Court. That's going to happen. But the way to fix it and the way to change it is for people to participate in the process. And it's not that much to ask people to vote. Like,
it's a privilege.
It's a privilege. And maybe do a little bit more. If you've got some extra, I encourage people to donate to state legislative candidates because they're on the front lines. They're actually the people who know their neighborhoods, who are doing get out the vote, right? They have the really keen sense of what needs to be done. And sometimes those people won't win. I was on a presentation last week for Rural Voter PAC, and Jennifer Kitchen from Virginia was on. She ran. She didn't win, but she increased turnout. And guess what? That's That's really important.
It
We
is.
need to increase
matters.
turnout and close margins in some of those harder areas. We need to increase turnout where our vote is stronger. So I just kind of feel like it's easy to be demoralized, but what's on the ballot is too important. And I know we always say this election is the most important. We actually see we have the parties are not equal. The media still treats them like they're equal. We have one party that was willing to undermine our democracy and still is.
Right.
It's frightening. You see it in Pennsylvania, there are state legislative candidates, people running for governor who say the election was stolen. It wasn't stolen.
Yeah.
There are people who make laws who are at January 6th.
Yes.
Not just in Pennsylvania, but all across the country. It ain't right.
You know, this is something that I've heard, you know, sort of acquaintances tell me is, because it's a popular thing to say. And like the media has helped make it popular, but, both sides do it. And I heard that once and
nails on a chalkboard.
I know. I was like so flabbergasted that I did, you have to figure out your audience and what they can handle and whatever. And I wish in that moment, I think I didn't shut that person down because I didn't have what are you talking about? I didn't like jump on them. Right. But I wish I had said something that is something that I think most people can agree with, which is, that's something that's popular to say, but only one party attacked the Capitol on January 6th. Supporters of only one party did that. So, it's just a fact. They can't say, oh, no, Democrats did that. No, Democrats didn't. They didn't attempt to have a coup. Like there's been no Democratic coup. They can say, oh, there were BLM protesters across the nation. Yeah, there were a lot of protesters across the nation in the wake of George Floyd being murdered on, like on television, basically in front of everybody. Right. So, but they were protesting for rights. They didn't try to steal an election. They didn't attack the U.S. seat of government. So that was one thing. One other thing you mentioned, Joe, was, people being demoralized. And I listen to Pod Save America oftentimes. And these are, three guys, for those who don't listen to it, who were Obama staffers in the White House. And
I honestly don't listen.
Yeah. So no, I listen to pods a fair amount because it's just an extra way for me to take in the news while I'm doing something like walking the dog or whatever. So, but one of the things that John Lovett, who was a speechwriter for Obama and initially a speechwriter for Hillary Clinton, I think during the 2016 campaign. But anyway, he was saying that one time he had this experience where he had written a speech for Hillary Clinton and he passed it by Bill Clinton, or someone did, and then he got feedback on it. And it was, the last part was all about how the nation needed to address climate change and environmental issues. And he had a bunch of facts in there, a bunch of eye-catching facts. And then what Bill Clinton did was cross it all out and say, and write something along the lines of, and this is very loose, right? This is not what he wrote, but it's very loosely, the project of saving the climate is going to be such an engaging, interesting, and, fun project for, da, 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 da. It was really uplifting. I'm sure it's much more eloquent than this, but really uplifting, not it's doomsday.
Right.
The climate is going to come and get us. It wasn't like that. It was listen, this is a project that we're going to take on as a country, and we're going to win this. We can win this, and we're going to do it together and make people feel empowered. And, and this can be a sort of joyous project of saving this for future generations. And that's the way I feel. I feel that way about climate change. I feel that way in this moment about democracy. We are all worried about our democracy right now. Especially people watching this, listening to this podcast, are worried about our democracy right now. And I feel like, as I have the privilege of being white, I had the privilege of growing up in Michigan in a middle-class American household. I have a good education. I went to good schools. I'm a proponent of public schools, by the way. Every school I went to was a public school, but they were still good schools. University of Michigan, I went to Cal for grad school. So I have, there's a lot of privilege. And we, and as the, it's sort of like the Gen Xer, the less than zero generation, who seemed kind of directionless and aimless because we didn't have to deal with something like, we kind of came of age a little bit past some of the worst of Vietnam, and we didn't send people off to war in World War II. You know what? This is our chance. This is our chance to make a difference that we haven't had a chance to make a difference for future generations yet. This is our chance to do it. Now I'm sappy. I'm getting like teary-eyed.
I love it.
Whatever. But like, we can do something real here. We can do something fundamental. We can do something important for future generations. Oh my God, I'm a sap.
No, you're making me hopeful, which is really hard to do, Carrie.
Right. So like, this is a piece, it feels like a slog, but if you invest in it, if you say, look, this is really important that we win this fight. And God, if you want to see people who are fighting the fight, look over at Ukraine. Look at what those, what the folks there are enduring in order to fight for freedom, in order to fight against what a horror show, President Vladimir Putin's Russia is. We can do this, and this is our chance to really make a difference. So I invite everybody to get involved. Anybody who, not anybody who wants to say something. Carolyn, Joe, we're about to close. We're about to close out. Yeah, we're going to have listener calls now. No, sorry. Although maybe one day we'll have something like that.
Say Democrats need to win state legislatures this fall.
There we go.
A comment and a question.
There we go. So I don't know, Carolyn, Joe, if you want to piggyback off that for a second, and then I'll take us home.
I'm just delighted to be here to guest host today. And I'm so high from my training experience in Pennsylvania on Saturday, just the energy in the room, all these candidates with all these great questions, and just they're willing to do the hard work of running for office, because running for office kind of sucks. It is hard. So the fact that all these folks were willing to arrive early on a Saturday morning, give their Saturdays to this endeavor and their Sundays, it was a multi-day training. It's absolutely amazing. And I love seeing stuff like that, because that's the kind of energy we need all across the country to be successful at every level of the ballot this November.
Yeah, that's great. Those people inspire me, and the staffers and the people who work for them inspire me.
It's right here in the fields.
Yeah, and Carrie, what you just said just really got to me too, because I kind of feel like we can do this. We are better than this. This vision that the Republicans paint of America as a hateful, divisive place. I know we have problems in this country. I know we have racism and homophobia and transphobia and anti-Semitism and attacks on our AAIPI brothers and sisters, but I still think we're better than this. And we can solve the climate issue. We can do this, but we have to work at it. It's hard work, and it's not easy. Nothing that's worth it ever is easy. And I give a shout out to everyone who is running for office, volunteering, donating. You're saving democracy. You're saving the planet. And yes, we are a bit demoralized right now. But if you think you're demoralized now, think what it would be like if the House and Senate go Republican in Washington, and if Donald Trump wins again.
Yeah,
our future, that's a bleak future. I want a hopeful future. Yeah. I want a hopeful future.
So does Trouble.
Right. What? What's that?
Trouble also wants a hopeful future.
Trouble? Is that your cat's name, Trouble?
It's my parents' cat. I've been looking after her while they've been traveling.
But their name is Trouble? Is that true?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, goodness gracious. So for podcasters or pod listeners, we've got a cat here. Carolyn's showing us the cat she's been caring for. Apparently her parents named them Trouble. And I think that gives us some psychological insight into the type of household that Carolyn Fiddler grew up in. So I think that seems like a perfectly appropriate closeout for today's podcast, today's show. Thank you for joining us. We're so happy to have you all. We appreciate your listenership. Please, if you haven't done so, find our podcast, subscribe to it. That helps us. Leave a glowing review, even if you think we were awful. Just say something nice. Lie for the first time in your lives. Lie for us. We appreciate that. Do it for trouble. Do it for trouble. I also want to thank Carolyn for joining me. I want to thank Joe Sudbay, my good friend, political consultant, and frequent host on Sirius XM, doing the State of the States, where Carolyn sometimes shows up. If you want more Carolyn,
who wants that?
So anyway, thank you for joining us all. Have a great week. We will see you here next week. And I think Marcos is back next week. So have a good week. Everybody stay safe and find some goodness out there. Find some goodness out there.
Take care of yourself.